Hello my friends and welcome to another theory video. Today, I want to talk about weekly bosses, and the candidates for who or what the next one could possibly be. Weekly bosses are one of my favorite parts of the game, as they always provide some good old lore when they release. So then, let's get straight into the video. Sumeru is a vast land, the biggest area of Teyvat released to date, and it's inspired by so many different cultures and locations. With that in mind, I went through the Genshin Wiki, Wikipedia, and even Genshin trailers to find some ideas for these inspirations that could fit Sumeru as well. To start, I'd like to talk about the World Turtle. The reason I thought of the World Turtle was because of Nahida's character demo. At the minute and 6-second mark, you can see a giant turtle appear for a moment in the background. I couldn't find anything relating to this turtle in the game, so if you find anything, please let me know in the comments. Continuing on with the idea of the world turtle though, it is actually a part of Hindu mythology, known as Akupara or sometimes Chukwa. In some instances, it is also described as carrying 4 elephants, which then in turn carry the world itself. This then made me think of the primordial one in the 4 shades, so it is possible that this turtle in the trailer was just referencing the flow of the world, and isn't something we'll actually see in-game anytime soon. On the other hand, it could be something completely different, perhaps a once friend of Great Lord Rukkhadevata, or maybe even King Deshret or the God of Flowers, who now roams the desert. Though to me, the idea that this turtle represents Genshin's equivalent of the world turtle is more likely. So with that one off the table, let's move on to the next idea, that being a creature similar to the world turtle, the world snake. In Hinduism, the world snake, also called Shesha, Sheshanaga, or Adeshi Shesha, is a primordial being of creation. I know I just said the world turtle is unlikely due to it most likely referencing the primordial gods, but I still wanted to touch on this real quick for a few bits of lore. Firstly, it is said that when Shesha uncoils, time moves forward and creation takes place, and that when he coils back, the universe ceases to exist. The mention of time makes me think of Istaroth, but more so all of the 4 shades. I've seen a theory going around recently that the 4 shades relate to the categories of artifacts, so let me explain what I mean here. One of the shades would be the shade of life, like the flower of life. The next would be the shade of death, like the plume of death. The next would be Istaroth, the shade of time, connected to the sands of Aeon. And the last of the shades would be the shade of void or space or the universe, something like that, referencing the goblet of Eonthium. And as for logic and the circlet of logos, that would represent the primordial one. Interestingly, the brief description I quoted about Shesha uncoiling references each of these categories except logic. This could mean that Shesha is equivalent to the primordial one, and that Shesha's abilities would also then be the abilities that the 4 shades of the primordial one possess. Now, one more thing about Shesha is that his name means he who remains, because even as the world is destroyed at the end of each Kalpa, Shesha remains as he is. This quote reminded me of Rukkhadevata and Nahida, and that even though they are different, they are still the same in a way, being different versions of each other in different samsaras. Perhaps instead Genshin's version of Shesha could act as an opposite to Rukkhadevata and Nahida, spreading abyssal corruption throughout a certain part of the Sumeru desert, which the Traveler and Nahida could have to stop together in a second act of Nahida's story quest, much like Zhongli with Azhdaha and Raiden with the Shogun puppet. Continuing on with this idea but from a different source, I'd like to talk about the Egyptian god of chaos, Apep, or Apophis. Apep was also represented by a snake, which is why I thought of him, and also thought to combine these 2 inspirations to create a weekly boss that takes elements from both. Now, as I said, Apep was the ancient Egyptian deity who embodied chaos, thus making him the enemy of most other gods, but especially Ra, the sun god and a primordial deity. Apep was actually born as a consequence of Ra being born, and was usually born from his umbilical cord. Despite this, Apep was not a primordial deity, and was just a consequence of Ra's birth, like I said. To me, This makes a creature based off of Apep much more likely to be a weekly boss. Like I said earlier, Apep is the greatest enemy of Ra, the sun god. And in Genshin, a character who has been referenced as the sun is Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. Nihilder calls herself the moon, and Greater Lord Rukkhadevata the sun. The origin of Genshin's equivalent of Apep could be similar, with the birth of Irminsul and Greater Lord Rukkhadevata also having the consequence of birthing abyssal power and corruption, and some sort of avatar for that as well. This avatar could very well be Genshin's version of Apep and or Shesha. Of course, if we do get this as a weekly boss, it is quite likely that Nihilda will help us out, and like I said earlier, we'll probably get a second act of Nihilda's story quest to introduce us to this boss. It would be very interesting to see what exactly this creature would be like, and what it would be capable of. Perhaps it could even be a creation of the Abyss Order, a test of sorts for the Loom of Fate project in making a mechanical god out of Osial, which is still going on in the background. They could have taken a fallen god and stolen some parts from the rune golems around Sumeru to create the Abyssal Snake. There are tons of possibilities for Shesha and Apep, from mechanical abyssal serpents to the antithesis of Irminsul and the Dendro Archon. Either way, I would love to see something like this. And I do have one more idea before I go, but this one is just more for fun, and one that I don't think is all that likely. This final candidate is none other than the Goddess of Flowers herself. And I know, she's dead. Or is she? Most likely, yeah, she is. But there is a divine nail located beneath Mount Damavand, which could produce some interesting results. Dragon Spine, the chasm's deepest point, and even Surumi Island are examples of what these nails can do in terms of leyline disturbances. The divine nail in Mount Damavand could have some time-altering or freezing effects, such as the Eternal Oasis, that could have also affected the Goddess of Flowers. Perhaps just a remnant of her is still alive, and that remnant could start causing mayhem throughout the local area. She's also most likely related to the Seelie race, so maybe instead of dying, she is now just a husk of her former self like the other Seelie. Whether this remnant is peaceful or not would remain to be seen, but based on what we know about her, it would probably be peaceful. However, no one is immune to the effects of erosion in Teyvat. Like Azhdaha, the remnant of the Goddess of Flowers could forget why she lost her life in a way, leading to anger and resentment to the desert. Even if she isn't a weekly boss, I would love it if a concept like this actually happened in-game. Keep in mind that I wrote this before the 3.4 update, so who knows, maybe it did happen and the Goddess of Flowers really is still alive in some way. In the end though, I doubt the Goddess of Flowers will become a weekly boss. I'm leaning much more towards a version of Shesha or Apep, or a combination of the two becoming the next weekly boss for Sumeru. I think that would be a pretty cool idea for a weekly boss as well, and there are tons of different ways it could be made. There are tons of other possibilities for weekly bosses too, and I'd love to hear what ideas you guys have as well as the comments below. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, sources and further readings are also available in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.